Hello, everyone. Welcome back to 3 News Now. I'm Stephanie Haney. Today is Thursday, April 22nd. Thank you for choosing to be here for your top stories from WKYC.com and our WKYC app. We start today with more information about LeBron James and some criticism that he's getting from the National Fraternal of Police. What happened yesterday was LeBron James tweeted a post calling for accountability related to the police killing of 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant. Also want to take a moment to apologize because yesterday I mispronounced her name. I said Ma'Khia Bryant. It is Ma'Khia Bryant, who was killed as the verdict in the Derek Chauvin murder trial was being handed down. That was in Columbus. She was shot by a police officer. Body camera footage has been released. So after that happened, LeBron James tweeted a photo of what is believed to be the officer who shot Ma'Khia Bryant. Now, he was named by the Columbus police, but no photo was released. And he tweeted the words, "Your next #accountability." Now, with that tweet, it seemed a very strong implication that LeBron James was implying you're next for charges and a trial. However, some people took that a different way. LeBron James deleted the tweet. He then tweeted this: "Anger doesn't do any of us any good. That includes myself. Gathering all the facts and educating does, though." He said his anger is still there for what happened to that little girl, speaking of Ma'Khia Bryant, and he has sympathy for her family and may justice prevail. He also went on to say that he's tired of seeing black people killed by police. He says he took the tweet down because it's being used to create more hate. And then he said, "This isn't about one officer, it's about the entire system." And he says this, quote, "They always use our words to create more racism. I am so desperate for more accountability." Now, there is body camera footage of the officer shooting of Ma'Khia Bryant. The officer has been named as Nicholas Reardon. The situation is being investigated, but the National Fraternal of Police is now criticizing that since deleted tweet from LeBron. The account for the Fraternal of Police wrote this: "King James," that's the Twitter handle, "with his vast resources and influence, should educate himself and frankly has a responsibility to do so on the facts before weighing in." Going on to tweet, "This is disgraceful and extremely reckless. The officer saved a young girl's life. No amount of gaslighting will change that fact." Now, there is some dispute about who actually called 911. There was a 911 call made in this situation where Ma'Khia Bryant was killed by police. Ma'Khia Bryant's family says that she called police saying that there were people fighting and that she was in danger, and that hasn't been clarified. Now, this does continue to be investigated. We have seen additional body cam footage that came out from the shooting. And what we have seen in that is that Reardon shot Bryant 4 times as she was swinging a knife at another girl in an altercation. And it's the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation that is currently investigating that shooting. We're also now hearing from one of the alternate jurors in the Derek Chauvin trial. Speaking out about the case, one of the alternate jurors has named herself. It's Lisa Christensen. Now, both jurors and alternate jurors' identities are protected by court order, but this is the first person to speak out again. This is not one of the people who was part of the guilty verdict. This is a person who was there throughout the entire trial to serve as an alternate, takes in all the witnesses, observes everything, but the alternates weren't needed, so at the end, both of them were dismissed by Judge Peter Cahill after the closing arguments on Monday, and it was the remaining jurors who voted unanimously to convict Derek Chauvin of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. So what Christensen is saying now, she said this on CBS this morning, was that she felt that he was guilty. She didn't know it was going to be guilty on all counts, but she would have said guilty. She said that she felt like Derek Chauvin was the leader of the officers who were there that day. Reminder, there are 3 other officers who will face trial in August for the death of George Floyd. And she said that Chauvin, in her view, it seemed like he felt like he was not taking the warnings seriously and kind of having an approach of, I know what I'm doing, because we did see evidence that people around George Floyd, people around the scene of what was happening were warning Derek Chauvin. We're warning the officers there that George Floyd was clearly in distress. Now, Chauvin will be sentenced in 2 months. Right now, we're in the period where there's investigation to see if there are any weighting factors that could be considered in determining his sentence. It's likely he could have a sentence of about 10 years based on what we've seen of how they handle the sentencing in the state of Minnesota. Could be 40 years, which is the maximum sentence for second-degree murder. That's unlikely. It's also possible, just legally possible, that sentences for all three of the crimes of which he has been convicted could run back-to-back, but that's very unlikely because they are crimes that are all tied to the exact same actions. Now let's take a look at the latest COVID-19 numbers coming from Johns Hopkins University. These are global and national numbers. Across the world, there have been a total of 144,176,429 reported COVID cases and 3,063,883 reported COVID deaths. Here in the U.S., there have now been 31,883,816 reported COVID cases and 569,696 reported COVID deaths. We are still seeing the percentages here in the U.S. go down ever so slightly, even though we lead the cases and the deaths by a wide margin here with only 4% of the global population. We have 22.1% of the COVID-19 cases here in the U.S. and 18.6% of the COVID-19 deaths, both of those numbers down a tenth of a percentage point from yesterday. Here in Ohio, the latest numbers from the Ohio Department of Health show 1,724 new reported COVID cases. And remember, a couple months ago, Governor DeWine told us that if the state gets to 50 cases per 100,000 residents, then all health orders will be lifted. Well, right now we're at just under 186 per 100,000 residents here in Ohio. This gets updated every Thursday. Last week we were at 200 per 100,000. So after a couple weeks of going up, we are now moving back in the right direction, but again, still a far cry from that 50 that's needed in order to lift those public health orders, according to Governor DeWine. We've seen 123 new hospitalizations in the last day. That's down a bit from yesterday. And right now there are 1,245 people in the hospital being treated for COVID here in Ohio. That is slightly up from yesterday. The rest of these numbers are also slightly up. There are now 393 people being treated in the ICU and 15 new ICU admissions in the last 24 hours. Let's take a look at the vaccination picture. Now there are more than 28% of Ohioans who are fully vaccinated. That's more than 3.3 million people, and 84,000 more people in the last day have become fully vaccinated. Of course, they still need that 2-week period to have the maximum protection, but they've got their second shot, is what we're saying with that number. And more than 38% of Ohioans have started the vaccination process. Again, remember those Johnson & Johnson single shots? Those are on hold right now, so we're only talking about the 2-dose Pfizer and Moderna vaccines right now. That's close to 4.5 million people who have started the process here in Ohio, and more than 41,000 in the last day who have gotten their first shot. Vaccine hesitancy, though, is a thing. 3 News Investigates took a look at this. Our Rachel Polanski took a look at what's happening at the hospital systems here in Northeast Ohio. What she found was at the Cleveland Clinic, 60% of staff have gotten a COVID-19 vaccine. At Metro Health, 69% of employees have gotten a COVID-19 vaccine. University hospitals didn't release the data to 3 News Investigates when they reached out. But at Metro Health, officials say that the vaccine has been taken by nearly all of its doctors. That's between 93 and 95% of its doctors, but that those numbers dropped dramatically for people who are in customer care and secretarial positions. It's anywhere between 30 and 45% of those people who have taken the vaccine. Metro Health Dr. Brooke Watts told 3 News that as you look through the levels of education, people who have less education, the vaccine rates seem to be dropping off for those people. And that echoes what we're seeing around the nation as well. According to a recent survey of 1,300 healthcare workers, less than half of them had been vaccinated. Now, across the board, about 40% of Americans have had at least one shot of the vaccine, and about 1 in 4, so about 25%, are fully vaccinated. That's according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Now, explanation for why people are hesitant about the COVID vaccine do vary, but most healthcare workers say that safety and the speed of vaccine development were the reasons for their waiting at this time. Here's some news out of Congress that makes a difference in our lives. There's been a bill passed in the U.S. House to make D.C., the District of Columbia, our nation's capital, the 51st state of the United States. It passed by a vote of 216 to 208. Now, under this bill, the state would be named the Washington Douglas Commonwealth. So it actually wouldn't be a state, it would be a commonwealth, but for all intents and purposes, same thing. That would be named after Frederick Douglass. Now, the D.C. delegate to the House, Eleanor Holmes Norton, has been leading the fight to try and make D.C. a state. She's been there for 30 years. She says making D.C. a state would end the disenfranchisement of more than 700,000 Americans who live in D.C. And it's kind of wild to think that there are 700,000 Americans who live in D.C. whose voice is not heard in this nation at the same level as the people who live here in Ohio, for example. And just to put this in perspective, the population of D.C. is larger than the population of Wyoming and the population of Vermont, and D.C. pays more in federal taxes per capita than any state. That's any state. That's even California. That's New York. Now, according to the mayor of D.C., Muriel Bowser, 45 senators have already said that the country would be stronger with D.C. as an official state. Now, here is where things get sticky, though. In order for D.C. to become a state, this has to pass in the Senate. In order for it to get a vote in the Senate, you need 60 votes to end debate on something. So D.C. could become a state if it could get to a vote with a 51-vote majority, which the Democrats do have. In case you haven't realized, the Democrats are in favor of D.C. becoming a state. Republicans, not necessarily. That's the question. And we do know that Joe Biden's administration did announce on Tuesday that they support the push for D.C. to become the 51st state. The Biden administration said that this would mean full representation in Congress and the opportunity for residents of the city to have equal participation in the country's democracy. So we'll have to see what happens there. But with the filibuster being alive and well in the Senate, might be a tough call unless there are some Republicans who are willing to cross the aisle to end the debate on the issue of D.C. becoming a state. Now, today, we're not seeing really any snow falling from the sky, but we definitely did yesterday. And of course, our Mike Polk Jr. had a take on that. And he says, it's a tradition here in Cleveland for there to be snow sometimes in the spring. He says sometimes it snows in May and sometimes it's 85 degrees on Thanksgiving. It comes with the territory. I know there have been many Halloweens, that's a month earlier than Thanksgiving, of course, where it's been either freezing or very hot. And, that it just comes with the territory of living here in Ohio. But Mike says he likes it. He says it makes us well-rounded people, and not to be too positive or anything, because he says that's not really his brand, but it gives a unique sense of appreciation, because I really like this line. If you truly want to appreciate what it is to be warm, you've got to spend some time in the cold. How about that? That's a metaphor for life. So he says he's prepared, whether he's wearing cargo shorts today or a parka. I'm sure we'll see him later on What's New, so we'll figure out exactly what he wore today. I think he's probably going to lean towards the parka if he steps outside, because it's still a little bit cold out there. Okay, let's talk about the big thing that's coming to Cleveland, the NFL draft coming next week. We are now 1 week away. It kicks off on Thursday, April 29th. We have your ultimate guide on WKYC.com, so make sure you check that out. We'll let you know how you can watch, where you can find coverage, and also I'm doing a preview of the NFL draft that's coming up on my podcast this week. That's dropping Saturday, and I'm talking with voice of the Browns, Jim Donovan. So make sure you pay attention for that. One more thing to let you know before we go here. Cedar Point is bringing back an iconic piece of the park history for the 2021 season. It's not a ride. It's not an old show. It's the Mercury statue. We've got a picture of it up on WKYC.com. Cedar Point Representative Tony Clark says that from what he's told, the statue of Mercury came from the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. George Boakling made a visit out there. Now, George Boakling was the president of what we now know to be Cedar Point's parent company. Now, originally, the Mercury statue was at the Windseeker Gate, which was previously called the Beach Gate, and then it moved to the original Marina Gate, which is now called the Valraven Gate, and that's where it had been, but it was there till 2016, had to be removed while they were doing some renovations in that area. It was at Cedar Point's Town Hall in storage until now, when it's back, and it will greet people when they enter the park. The park opens on May 14th. We've got everything you need to know about that also on WKYC.com. Okay, that's it for your 3 News Now update for Thursday, April 22nd. I'll see you next up on What's New with your trending stories in Clicking in Cleveland, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for more 3 News Now. Between now and then, everyone, stay safe and be well. I'm Stephanie Haney.